Live from Kent, this is The Late Late Show with Toby Payne-Cook and Ed Finch. And you are listening live.
And Ed Finch is in Devon, not in Kent. And it's that big, deep voice. Welcome, it's Wednesday night. Welcome to Toby and Ed. We're going to be talking about creativity, creative thinking, and the nature of curious children. And are they all different? Are they the same thing? When we think about that, we're going to carry on with professional identity from last week. I'm going to talk about Blur and Oasis and trans frogs.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org or join in the conversation by downloading the Podbean app and following Teachers Talk Radio. Hashtag TT Radio.
Hashtag TT Radio. Hope you're enjoying the new opening jingle, everybody. Welcome to the show. Good evening, Lucy. Good evening, Rich. And good evening, Snit. PSNC, and good evening to those of you who are going to be listening to us whilst you're doing the ironing, commuting to work, or going for a jog, or whatever, whenever you listen to us. But thank you very much for listening to us, and thank you very much for giving up the time to listen to our rambles. I am waiting for Ed. I think he's with us this evening. He was probably a bit confused. Here he is. I started a bit late. Sorry, Ed. I started a bit late. Good evening.
Popped in a ball, but there you go. I've only just got here. What's been going on? What did I miss?
You missed our new jingle again. You missed
that jingle,
and you missed it. Over the jingle that we're going to be talking about creativity, creative thinking, the curiosity of young children, a bit about professional identity, carrying on from last week, and maybe a little bit of Blur, Oasis, trad versus prog, and flawed surveys on Twitter. But first of all, Ed, I owe you a massive apology, and I'm going to remain silent for a few seconds because I inferred
you did. Oh no, I didn't.
Inferred something horrible about you yesterday.
Oh, you did, but I didn't think you meant to. So
I didn't mean to. No, I absolutely didn't mean to
say that I was a narrow, vain, shallow, solipsistic misogynist, did you? That wasn't what you're meaning to say. But, somehow that's how it came out. It's just like that sometimes with discourse, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the problem with it's the problem with the written word, really, isn't it? It's open to interpretation without the body language and the intonation and the clarification. And I think I went off on one a little bit because Richard.
I've forgotten the context in which you insulted me.
I can't. I didn't insult you. The context was Richard, who's listening live, complimented us on the invitation and our conversation with Daniel last week, Daniel Bundred, and thought it worked quite well. And I did think it would work quite well. And I think, and he said, maybe you should have guests more often. And
I thought it was a big credit to Daniel, who presumably wasn't expecting to jump on the call and join in, but did so and was very clear. I've never met Daniel. I'd like to now. I mean, not that I wouldn't have liked to before, but he was. It was great having him on, and he did well. He is a good person. I like him.
Yes, I think so. He was eloquent and wise and articulate, and I know that his position is not liked by some of the other people but it was rationally argued. And well reasoned, and I think just picking up on that, we should probably carry on where we left off last week briefly. But in a moment, let's do the quick hello. How are you? How are you? How's your week going? How's your tiredness? How's your frustration with underfunding and British politics and all that stuff?
Tiredness, 7.5, 8 out of 10, perhaps.
Yeah.
Frustration with the constraints of the, school system we're within. I don't know. At points today, it peaked around 9, I would say.
Whoa.
No, it is very, very frustrating trying to do everything we need to do, run a school and teach 50% of the timetable and deal with stuff and try to remain human with it. There's the hard bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really difficult. I had I had a couple of situations I had to deal with today, and and other stuff is going on. Like you're trying to deal with something which actually makes quite a big difference to a human being's life. At the same time, you've got people firing questions at you, and there's not enough money in the system to try and make the things that you want to happen. And you're just like, oh, do you know what? It is a bit broken.
Mm.
So yeah, no, I'm glad we've got this tonight, because otherwise I think I would be in a grump. But
Oh,
speaking to
good.
you always cheers me up, my
Oh,
love.
well,
It would
it
always
does. It
does.
does.
Just
And
knowing you
likewise,
there,
can I tell you about?
caring for me. Sometimes you just need to know that
Oh,
someone out there cares about you.
well, I think that's
And
nice. Yeah, I'm talking over you.
you are, but anyway,
I
no,
think.
but yeah, carry on.
I think that it's I think that's the point of our show, actually, isn't it? It's a little indulgent, perhaps, but we're not on Radio One in prime time, so I think it's okay.
Soon, surely.
It's that it is just a nice sort of catch up in public, really. I mean, it's not hugely public. I mean, but it's a nice sort of catch up, and it is something to look forward to. I like it. I like it too. Can I tell you about the strangest day in my educational teaching life thus far? It was Monday.
Yes.
So
Yes.
on Sunday, I communicated with a friend who lives in Hawkhurst, which is the village where my school is, and she told me there was no water. There was no water supply, and that it was
Hmm.
likely that the school she teaches at, which is also very near Hawkhurst, and my school, and indeed the village primary, were likely to be closed on Monday, because you can't really run a school without any running water, because you can't flush the
No.
loos and drink water and cook lunch and la 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 la,
Hmm.
or wash your hands, etc., etc. So I but we went into school. So I went into school on Monday morning, and there was still no
Hmm.
water. It was supposed to come back on at 6 o'clock Monday morning, but it didn't. So that's
Hmm.
why we went into school. And then there was an announcement from Southeast Water that there was going to be no water until the afternoon. So a decision obviously
Hmm.
was made by the school, but all the children were in the school. So we had assembly, Monday morning assembly as usual. And then we would just but then children were allowed to go home, or expected to be collected by 12, because I think that and so we ran normal school until 12. Quite a lot of children disappeared at sort of 9:30, 10 o'clock,
Hmm.
10:30. By 12 o'clock, except for staff children, everyone had gone home. So that was the water thing. But at
Yeah.
9:05 on Monday morning, I didn't find out about this until break time. None of us found out about it until break time. At 9:05, we had the call from the Independent
Oh.
Schools Inspectorate. So
Oh.
we
Right.
had the call on Monday morning. But of course, the head said it's possible that we are without water still on Tuesday, and
Hmm.
that might
And there'll be no pupils in. Yeah.
and there'd be no pupils in, and so forth. So they so they then the message was they were going to have to contact the ISI, were going to have to contact the DFE to sort of defer the
Hmm.
inspection, right? So,
All right.
but at that time, when we were told we had an inspection the next day, we were told that it was unlikely the DFE were going to grant us this wish, and we needed to
Yeah.
prepare for inspection. So
Hmm.
on Monday, it was quite a blessing in some respects, because the children all went home, so we had the whole
Yes.
afternoon. So
So long
so
as nobody needed to flush a toilet, it was fine.
so between 11:30, sort of 11
Hmm.
after our break time meeting, between about 11 ish and 2 ish. No, so yeah, and then we had a meeting. The staff had a meeting once all the kids had gone home. We were asked to stay. There was bottled water provided, and etc. etc. So, but we were told we could go home at 2:30. But we had a meeting at 1 o'clock, and about preparing for the inspection. And then I went into you know prepare for inspection mode,
Yeah.
and was thinking I was going to have quite a late night on Monday. I was thinking I was going to have quite a late night, because I wasn't really feeling quite ready with some of my bits and pieces. And so,
Hmm.
it was going to be that night before inspection busyness. And then at 2 o'clock, we got a notification that the inspection would be deferred, and likely to be deferred until after Christmas, because obviously the
Really?
inspectors are all lined up and scheduled and booked in their
Okay.
calendars. So
Yeah.
it wasn't going to be deferred by a week or 2 weeks. So, I suppose there's a small chance it could be just before Christmas, but it sounds like it's going to be January or February. And so I was into that sort of deep, emotional, intense preparation mode. and then suddenly, breathed a sigh of relief. So, and then I came home Monday mid-afternoon because I was desperate for a cup of tea and some running water because I had running water at home, and then I had quite a lazy Monday evening. Watched the news, had some food, and then I finished reading my book, my brilliant book that I put a tweet on today, The Romantic by William Boyd, which is going to be talked about briefly at Gentlemen's Feasting Club, also known as Book Club, tomorrow night. And so instead of spending the whole evening preparing for an inspection, I spent 3 hours, which is an unheard of amount of time, to be sitting still on the sofa reading a book. And I just thought, how bizarre is that? It was just a topsy-turvy emotional day. It was very weird. And then we all went back to school on Tuesday morning, and with running water, and everything was fine. And so there we go. So I would have, obviously, if we had an inspection, this radio show probably would have been cancelled, postponed, or whatever, because I'd have been preparing lessons for tomorrow and all that malarkey. So because we have a 3-day inspection, ISI, I think that's not ICI, I used to work for them, ISI, Independent Schools Inspectorate, which is actually kind of very similar to the previous Ofsted framework. So we're not on the, they tend to lag one framework behind in ISI. So we haven't got into that whole deep dive curriculum thing.
In terms of the ISI, then, so if they were a framework behind, is it all about looking at internal data and saying, why isn't this micro cohort or that?
It's not so much into data, but it's all about, it's still about the sort of, I don't know, maybe it is still about this in the new Ofsted framework. It's all about demonstrating progress within a lesson, which of course is a farce, really.
We've moved on from that.
It's demonstrating progress in a lesson. It's quite prog in the sense that it's quite they want lively kind of lessons, not too much teacher talk. It's all that sort of stuff.
Like ringing the clock back, my friend. That is like ringing the clock back. Yeah, that's rather sweet. It
is quite sweet. But I suspect, unless there's a revolution, I suspect they will review their framework in line with Ofsted. I think there are some merits in the new Ofsted framework. A lot of the sort of fluffy guff has gone. However, there is, as we've discussed before, there's too much emphasis on too much precise curriculum. But you can choose your own curriculum if you're not if you're in an academy or
we can absolutely
or a free school. But obviously
we have to demonstrate it as the same breadth and depth as the national curriculum. It doesn't need to be the same as the national curriculum, So you got that. I was talking earlier this week to a gentleman who was trying to sell me a product, and it's a product I'm moderately interested in, so I'm happy to let him try and sell it to me. So we're going to meet up and have a chat. I said, well, listen, if you want to come to Crediton and we can have a pint in the pub, that and you can tell me about this thing, that's fine, but it's quite a long drive for you. And he goes, do you know what? I once drove from home, which is the south coast of Devon, to Oxford to hear you speak. So I think it's not too bad. I was like, no, that can't be right. He's like, yeah. Admittedly, Jamie Pembroke was speaking as well. So I'm like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. That was the conference in which Sean Harford announced the changes to the framework to the framework now. So my warm-up act was, I think, thoroughly upstaged by Sean Harford, saying, we won't be looking at your internal data, and it's all going to be about breadth of curriculum and entitling that every child has a rich entitlement. I was shouting from the rafters. I was like, we have won, my friends. Look at this. This is what we've been campaigning for, and this is what we got. We spoke, they listened. I was a big cheerleader. Of course, what happened was that the rubber hit the road and things got bent out of shape pretty quickly. And I mean, I'm in a middle-sized school. I think really it's 150 pupils. That's somewhere in the middle. It's still technically small, but I think it isn't really. It's just about operates as a one-form entry, near enough. In the truly small schools, those schools where there's two classes, one class has got R1, 2, and the other class has got 3, 4, 5, 6. In those circumstances, the new framework is an absolute dogs in it. Does not make any sense. I'd like to talk to the reading lead. Okay, that's me. Okay. And then after that, if I could speak to the maths lead. Oh, yeah, also me. Okay. And then after that, we really do need to speak to the safeguarding lead. yes, that's me.
Yes.
You know, and
Yeah.
you know, so
I
you know,
think,
have you done a deep dive into this subject? No, not really. I'm quite busy teaching and running the school, so it doesn't really work in small schools. It's a shame because I will absolutely say that the intentions were thoroughly good and absolutely the
and
right
Sean
thing.
Harford is a good man, isn't he? Sean Harford, he was booted off Twitter, wasn't he? Because I think he may have left Ofsted now. I heard a rumor. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe he has left
I
Ofsted now.
think,
Yeah,
but he
because
was sort of second in command to Amanda Spielman. Is that right? I think, and
yeah, so he
he,
was head of
I heard him
schools, but
speak at,
Ofsted covers lots of things. You know, Ofsted doesn't. We always talk about it in terms of schools, but it covers
covers
lots of things.
yeah,
You know,
but he
and he was in charge of schools, and that's a big old job. But he was second in command, and he did have to try and. I remember him speaking very frankly. We were saying that in a question Q&A and a thing, not not in a personal conversation, but we were saying we need to get rid of this ridiculous outstanding thing, which is totally
mm,
spurious and totally subjective. We need
mm,
to get rid of that and have either your school is good enough or your school is not good enough. That's what we need to
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And he's like, well, do you know what? I agree with you, and I think you'll find probably the majority of people who work for Ofsted agree with you. But the politicians just won't have it. They think that parents like the outstanding judgment, and they won't have it any other way. So you've got this focus on curriculum, no longer looking at internal data because we know that's all cooked up in the back room while we're on the premises, if necessary.
yeah,
Um, you've got that bit, and I don't think you're going to win he was very frank. I don't think you're going to get it. In fact, I remember when I had just joined Twitter, which is yeah, 8 9 years ago, I think now. I remember eavesdropping on a conversation between Sean and Michael Claddingbowl, who did his job before him. I don't know if you remember Michael, still
no,
lurking around and still a very interesting man, well worth looking out for. In which they were having this conversation on Twitter. I think maybe they'd misunderstood the difference between tweets and DMs because they were saying, Michael, who was the outgoing person in the job, was saying we need to get rid of this nonsense of the outstanding. It just doesn't work, and they were kind of agreeing on that and saying that's what we need to work towards. But it's going to be a long old journey. Those tweets have gone. I think somebody the next
yeah.
morning said, "You
Well, I
two,
think
you've
that's
missed."
what when I joined Twitter was I was a very late adopter,
Mhm,
October 2018, and then we were into summer 2019, and I went to Curriculum Ed in Lichfield Cathedral School, organised by Sputnik Stephen Lane,
mhm.
and
Lovely man.
met Sean Harford, and
Mhm.
had chat with him over lunch. Actually, Sean Harford and your friend, I think Sam Twistleton, and I met.
Yes.
That's when I met wonderful Nick Wood as well, and Martin Robinson and quite a few other people. I enjoyed that day. It was quite a
Sounds like a
trad
good day
day
out.
for
Good
me.
day out. Yeah.
But I enjoyed chatting with Sean, and he was quite active on Twitter, and people liked that. But then I think he said, he's told, just as Mark and Zoe Enser no longer tweet about education because they have their Ofsted jobs. So it's a
Well, I mean,
slightly political role. So you
it
can't.
wasn't really that. It was because he kept being drawn into arguments by a certain tweeter. It's a person I like personally very much, but who was
The
really
king of
noted for
arguments.
his
The
life
king of
attitude.
arguments is that our math teacher friend?
No, I'm not going to be. I'm not going to say
Not
it was,
new,
but
not new, but no. Okay. Oh, maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was Talk for Teaching. Yes. Anyway,
anyway, he kept
no
being
further
drawn
comment.
into these situations, and I think initially they were like, "It's brilliant having this guy on Twitter because, like, somebody says, hang on a sec, I don't understand this." He'd just jump in and explain it. I thought he did it really well. I tell you
Mm.
who I also miss. I miss his wife Lisa, who I think is a tremendous person, and I haven't seen her on the Twitters either. So, if anybody listening knows Sean and Lisa, will they
There's
give
another
them our
famous
best
Harford,
regards?
isn't there? Tim Harford is who's nothing to
Yeah.
do with education.
Well, I don't
What?
think he's anything to do with education. He must have been educated, so you can't really say nothing
Okay,
to do.
good point. Well made. But we've
He does
diverted.
numbers, Tim Harford,
We
doesn't he?
no
He
we've
does
we've we've
numbers.
we've yes, that's right. We've wonderfully deviated and I think
Oh,
that's exactly
sorry.
what we should do. But whilst we've been talking about Ofsted, I think the problem with any inspection framework, and this applies to sort of laboratory safety inspections when I was at Pfizer as well, or any safety inspection, any kind of form of any inspection framework. And it applies to Progress 8 in secondary schools as well. If you put however broad, I mean, Progress 8 is quite narrow, but however broad your inspection framework is, people are then going, this is the challenge with schools. I think Ofsted, the inspection framework, HMI, ISI, whatever, it's as someone said to me at school the other day, that's really what it's all about. And whether it should be about that or not, I don't know. I don't want to get into that now, but I just think the challenge is however well thought out an inspection framework is, whether it's a safety inspection framework or a compliance inspection framework or a quality of education, quality of learning, quality of teaching, whatever, you're going to have people playing the game, and then you sort of narrow the scope of perhaps what a school should be, or you narrow the scope of what perhaps education should be, and however good willed and warm-hearted and thoughtful the inspectors are, it changes the behaviours within a school, and then also perhaps, this is a really controversial comment, but perhaps the people who progress through school management and into SLT and beyond are the people who are best at playing that game, and not necessarily the best at creating a really purposeful community and ethos within the school. And they're very, they're box tickers ultimately. And so that's the problem with any form of inspection, any form of compliance inspection is it's important to check that things are being done right and people aren't are doing their jobs, if you like, and providing a good service. But on the flip side, that becomes all, doesn't it? And the heart can be perhaps knocked out of it a bit.
Inspections, is it? Any framework. I was trying to argue the other day about the year 2 reading test. Does it test what you think it tests? Don't get me started on the year 6 reading SAT. Does it test what you think it tests? No, it doesn't test reading. It tests general knowledge. It tests, at the very best, breadth of vocabulary. So when we're trying to prepare those children for those things, we get sucked into all sorts of rabbit holes. We get sucked into the rabbit hole of, teaching them different sorts of test questions, and we teach them how to miss out which is very bad advice indeed, by the way, miss out the difficult ones and come back to them later. You won't come back to them later, and you'll just give up on things before you address them. And all this nonsense, and you go, actually, at the end of the day, we're not testing reading. So why don't we could be a bit honest about that and say we're testing the richness of children's life experience up to that point, and we're testing the vocabulary they've been exposed to. But you've got to do something, apparently. I'm sure there's lots of people out there. I was reading a thing from Philip Pullman earlier saying, why on earth would you want to know what children have got from a text? They'll get whatever they get from it, and like years to come it will flower. Yeah, but in today's education framework, somebody wants me to put a tick in a box to say that this child is an age-related expectation, or that they're not, and what I'm going to do about it. So as soon as you put any metric, people work for the metric,
Metrics that's it. And we can then, I suppose we can blame computers and maths for that, can't we, really, ultimately?
But, I mean, what's the alternative, I guess, that lots of people would say, and I don't totally disagree, is like, if you look at the days before the national curriculum, you had schools and teachers that were doing the most terrific job, and we mourn their passing. Teachers looking at the children in front of them and saying, what is going to turn this child on to knowledge? What is going to turn them on to learning? What are we going to do? How are we going to explore it? How are we going to exploit it? And, that kind of deep planning, which we just don't do anymore. That was a feature of great schools before the national curriculum. The feature of bad schools under the national curriculum, I kid you not, as a lady was telling me with the evangelical zeal in her eye, we did a term where we kept chickens. Did you? I'm like, oh, maybe you did maths about chickens and painted the chickens, and maybe,
no,
I don't know.
We just kept chickens.
No, we didn't. We kept chickens in the toilet. So we had 2 toilets, so we kept the chickens in one of the toilets and put chicken wire across the front. The children could use the other toilet. They loved it. They were fascinated. I'm like, my word. Okay, maybe we did need a national curriculum to save us from the chicken keeping. But
exactly. No, exactly.
There's good and there's bad now, isn't there? There's
I think that's it. Are there enough there's not, this applies to every aspect of life. For the number of the way our school system set up, are there enough good, really great head teachers who are great leaders to go around? Are there enough great classroom teachers to go around? Probably not. So it's become all about systems, hasn't it? In the big schools, it's all become about systems.
Yeah.
So
well, it is that, isn't it? So we go, okay, well, we can't rely on inspiring teachers, so we have to have systems in place so that every teacher can do a job, And I don't.
Which ironically may scare off the inspiring teacher, and so you end up with these sort of middle ability, sort of slightly bland. I'm being really controversial, sorry. You sort of end up, it's a bit like Big Brother contestants, isn't it? Or I'm a Celebrity winners, probably. The more quirky the character, the more awkward and challenging, but potentially interesting, they tend to get voted out somewhere in the middle. They'll be kept in for a while, but the safe one who doesn't really rock the boat, who's a great sort of ultimately not the super boring get voted out first. The sort of just the cautious end up winning these things, and that's okay, because we don't want a world full of mavericks, because that wouldn't be great. But equally, we don't want to scare all the mavericks off, because the mavericks make life more interesting sometimes.
I suppose you could say, your child is going to be at primary school for 6 years, and in those 6 years, you want them to have some really solid mid-ranking players who do the basics and get them through, to actually teach them how to read and write and do maths. You'd want at least one stone cold insane teacher in there that they can talk about when they're.
Exactly.
I don't know. Were you?
I think so.
I don't know. I don't know. People say, I often run into people from Oxford. Oh, the children still talk about you, and you think, I don't know. That's an unmitigatedly good thing, actually.
No. Well, exactly. It's hard, isn't it? I think that's it. Anyway, we are gonna. I'm just gonna. Let's go back. Let's go on to just literally for 2 or 3 minutes. I don't think we need to say very much about this, about the sort of professional identity. I wanted to talk about, so last week we spoke about teacher identity, and that, is it just a job? Are you, if you're doing the job of teaching, are you a teacher? Or if you were trained as a teacher and teaching's in your bones and part of your identity, are you a teacher? So we did that discussion last week, and I think I think we did it fairly comprehensively, but we didn't quite get into the sort of more, the question. I've got the survey here. I did think I read it out right at the end of the show, but apart from family, brackets, mum, dad, cis, little brother, etc., gender, social class, background, politics, religion, sexual orientation, nationality, and ethnicity, what do you consider to be the most prevalent part of your identity? And 124 people voted. Only 3% said academic background. So what they studied either at school or at university.
Them went to Oxford.
Yes. And then 59% said professional job, 27% said personality traits, and 11% said interests and hobbies. So I, at first reading of that, I was sort of intrigued, because a lot of people that I know, most of my friends, because I went to university, most of my friends also went to university, because, we tend to mix with the sort of, our either our intellectual equivalents or our social equivalents, don't we? That's how life pans out. And so, and I know there are a lot of people who sort of do describe themselves, well, I'm a chemist, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm a well, if you're a lawyer, you've probably gone into law and you've probably done it for a few more years after university, or I'm a whatever, I'm an economist or something. And but I suppose, it doesn't surprise me that actually very few people use those 3 years, because I always find it ridiculous that we define ourselves by those 3 years. So I'm pleased to see that most people don't think that they do that. I'm slightly more perturbed, and I would do it. We do it because when we meet people, don't we? And say, if you meet a complete stranger and you're chatting in a sort of semi-formal social situation, often the first question, because it is an icebreaker, is, well, what do you do, or where do you work? And if when I was a scientist, and he said, well, I'm a scientist. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, and people find one intrigued, because you don't meet scientists very often. And then once I started prattling on about what I did, they eyes glazed over and they drifted off. But they found the idea of being a scientist quite exciting. If I now say I'm a teacher, we probably have a longer conversation because everyone's got an opinion about education and schools, and they've probably either got children who are going through school or have been through school or are about to go through school. And so that everyone's, there's a bit of conversation there, but equally people, I don't think teachers are held in as high regard in society as scientists, from my personal experience. Certainly from my children's perspective, I'll be quite, and I'm sorry, this is Teachers Talk Radio, but my children say, Dad, I preferred it when you were a scientist. It's cool having a dad as a scientist. It's not cool having a dad as a teacher. And that is, I think, the collective general consensus is that teachers aren't cool because they're these sort of authority figures, and only probably 20 or 30% of people really love school. Most of people just kind of get through it, and some people will have a teacher who inspires them and excites them. Others will have teachers who, like, they just see them as people who are, so I think, but we do tend to identify ourselves or introduce ourselves based on our profession, whereas I do think it would be more interesting if we described ourselves based on our personality, a little bit more, because I don't think
bits, the most important, the most important thing about me at the end of the day is that I'm the father to my son. He's still, at the moment, that may not be the case in another few years, but at the moment he still desperately needs me. He's that age that he's growing up and he's an independent man, and you know him and you know what he's like. But it's still vitally important that I'm his dad, and that's the key relationship in my life, and I think that's the key relationship in his life. And I have to remember that everything else is extra. I have to earn some money, otherwise we can't eat food. But that's the bit, and
I agree.
Really
so family,
Yeah.
your position. I didn't give that as an option because I kind of ruled that out, because I think a lot of us would, we're a dad or we're a mum or we're a brother or we're a sister or we're a son or a daughter, and that is where it starts, and that is, I agree, it is the most important, and God, it's stressful and hard and difficult at times, but it's also the most fulfilling and wonderful and rewarding as well. So I agree. I think I changed my Twitter profile recently because I was getting a bit fed up. Well, now that badgers are dead, I was getting a bit fed up with being the edgy bat. So I think I am just. I think I have just described myself, as, oh, go away. What are you doing? There's all sorts of random crap going on Twitter at the moment. Right, Dad, teacher, former scientist, at TT Radio 2022, co-host, tweeting about education, science, philosophy, Wild Coast, farming, music, books, and nonsense. There we go. So so I think you're right. I think we are dads first, and then we, but equally, we're sort of we're extroverts or we're introverts or we're curious or we're music lovers or we are sporty types, or we are, there's all that. But it's interesting how what we do for a living, and it is in most cases what we do for a living, rather than our life's passion, isn't it? It sort of does define in other people's eyes, if not in our own eyes, who we are. So there's a load of, when someone finds out one is a teacher or one is a doctor or one is a bin man or a bin lady, or a bin person, we tend to, however open-minded and kind and empathetic and wonderful we may be, we tend to put them in a bit of a box, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And one of the things I've always, it's a tiny soapbox bit really, is like, when I first started teaching, which wasn't in the UK state system, I was teaching overseas, and I hadn't done it before really, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought the quickest way to look like a good teacher or to be a good teacher was going to be to emulate the kind of teachers that I wanted to be or respected. So I worked quite hard at being like those people, and it was exhausting, and it wasn't very authentic, and it wasn't great teaching actually, because I was always, there's always that thing between me and the pupils, this sort of level of pretense. When I learned to strip that away and go, I'm going to be very authentically me, and that's who you get, engagement improved and and outcomes improved. Just you could see it felt better, it felt more authentic, but also the teaching was better because they were getting better results in their little tests. So I sort of thought that was quite early on in my personal development as a teacher, is thinking, do you know what? I'm a better teacher if I'm authentically me. I'm a better teacher if I'm more honest about
Bless
who I
you.
am. Have I got another sneeze coming? Normally
There's
they come
always
in
a second
twos.
one. They do come
Well,
in
I don't know.
twos,
Well,
don't they?
maybe I'll keep the second one for later. But yeah, I know. I mean, that sounds kind of frothy and nonsensical, but
No,
it was very true. I think that I had to go through this thing of trying to be someone else to go, do you know what? I'm just better off being me. But I've carried that on, and I don't think it's always done me favors. Really, I don't think it's always done me professional favors. But I've always kind of stuck with it because I just thought, if you're not you, who are you?
I
Um,
agree. I think a lot of a lot of people who are true. I'm not a very well. I'm selling myself down the river a bit. I can be really professional when I absolutely have to be. I think I can do it. I can do it. But I don't like this flipping into being a different version of myself. I like to just be how I feel, and that's quite challenging as a teacher. And maybe in many ways, being a teacher doesn't suit me because I'm quite a spontaneous and slightly, nonconformist individual, and you
mm,
but I think I've always found it weird in the workplace, whether it was in science or in teaching, when people can seemingly sort of flip into being a completely different version of themselves. Whereas, I suppose I'm different with different people. So if I'm hanging
yeah,
out with my music geeky gig fans, then I'm quite a different person to, or I'm at Glastonbury or WOMAD. I'm quite a different person to when I'm in a
yeah.
a
That's true,
family
but I mean,
gathering or in the classroom.
you
But
probably use a different voice on the phone to,
yeah,
to your mum and to your mate. That's part of being a
absolutely.
human. The question is, are you always yourself? That's not that you always present exact thing. Think about your voice. The voice that you hear in your head is different to the voice that you hear when we tape you.
Yeah.
People listening to this through their phones are getting a different version of you. For people, if anybody's listening to it through massive, great speakers, they're getting very different. That's because of the formant of the voice. When I sing, a middle A at 440 cycles a second, that's not what you're hearing. You're hearing all sorts of overtones that are echoing around my mouth and my throat and my head and my chest are all bringing out different overtones of the voice, and that's what you hear. You hear this really quite complex set of things. When you listen to music in the car, sometimes if the road's noisy, you can't pin it to a key
Oh
because you're
yeah.
missing really informative parts of the formant, which means actually, and then you go onto a different road surface, and sometimes there's quite a mental lurch as it suddenly resolves into the key that it really in. And I think that's true of us. We have, I'm not a different person when I'm speaking to a member of the family as opposed to when I'm speaking to, my son or or a friend in the pub or that's not a different person, but there's different aspects of me, different parts of the formant are being drawn out. That's different from trying to pretend to be someone else.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and that links to a topic which I think
Mm.
we might have to defer till next week because,
All right.
but I think that links to you. We're all. Lucy said it, so there's some great comments in the chat. Actually, Lucy's
Oh, I'll
just
have a
said
look. I'll
levels
have
of
a look at the
self. I'm
chat.
never not me, just see more or less of me depending what I prune for circumstances. And I think when we're, but when different people create different versions of ourselves as well, don't we?
Yeah.
So
And
if we're
some of
with
that pruning that Lucy's doing there is on purpose because she's like, oh, I'm speaking to someone quite important. I better not swear, you know. And some of it is just reacting to how that person is. But because she's I think she's my sort of age. You've met her, I haven't.
Lucy is
Because she's
is our sort of age.
so she's an adult.
She obviously looks a lot younger than us, though, Ed. But
You're 21,
she's
I'm sure,
definitely our sort
but
of age.
but once you get to that point in your life when you've got enough edges knocked off and enough life experience, then you've got a really rich formant to draw on. Whereas when I was in my early 20s, there was a certain amount of pretense going on. I don't think many young people aren't. That's not very good. That's not a very good sentence, but do you know what I mean? I think I was trying on different versions of myself, and some of them weren't as authentic as others. Whereas now 51. God save me. I think
Yeah.
there's more versions of me.
No, and that's what we do in adolescence. We are desperate. Well, virtually all of us, unless you're extremely confident. It was very interesting. I watched the Louis Theroux Youngblood thing last night, which was interestingly, that was fascinating. It's sort of about he's great, Louis Theroux. I'm a big fan. And Youngblood was quite an interesting character. But yeah, it was just, I think, unless you're extremely confident to stand out, through our adolescence, we just want to fit in, even though we know it feels wrong a lot
The
of the time.
simplest level of this.
I
I am
pretended to be a
looking at the
goth.
chat.
I wasn't naturally
Yeah.
a goth.
Yeah. So the simplest level of this is what Kate said. She says, you've got to remember that you're more than your identity, whether a professional identity is not who you are. If you get to a point when you think, who am I? I am a teacher. Or who am I? I am a head teacher, or whatever it is. You make yourself incredibly brittle. Incredibly brittle. Look, Mrs. P's back in, and she knows
Mrs.
about
P,
this
hi,
stuff.
Mrs. P. Hi, Maxim's just joined as well. Hi, Kate. Some great comments. Kate's made some good comments earlier on as well as we spool up a little bit. We are going to go to the news in a minute, and we're going to defer. We're going to have to defer the creativity thing because that needs a whole show. So I think this professional identity, I did think it was
After
quite
the
a big
news, there's
thing.
only going to be about 10 minutes left, so we
Exactly.
on,
So and there's some frivolous stuff to talk about as well. So let's just go. Let's stick with this, and then we'll do the news. And with 10 minutes left at the end, I think, because I just think I learned to introduce myself with my values and what matters to me, not my job title. I think that's really cool, Kate. I love that too. Who I am versus what I do. That's absolutely it. But of course, who we are does change through our lives unless we do the same job or work in the same environment for our whole life. We tend to, that's the book I've just read. Oh, I could go on about it for days. The Romantic, by William Boyd. He teed it up at the beginning with an author's note about how he had some notes about this guy called Cashel Greville Ross, who he had a few notes about him, and he was going to write a sort of biography about him, but he didn't have enough information to write a biography about him. And so he wrote basically a fictional story of this guy's life. I suspect him having the notes about him was fiction in itself, right? Because he's a very clever writer, William Boyd. But Cashel Ross lived from 1799 until 1882. And so it was basically a biography of this guy's life who fought at Waterloo and then was in the East Indian Army, and then he hung out with the Romantic poets in Byron and Shelley and so forth in Pisa, and then he fell in love in Ravenna, and then he went to America. He was in Marshalsea debtor's prison for a while, and it's kind of he was always, and by the end of the book, he was always the same person, a romantic, and who and it really quite resonated with me, how life, had a lot of whims but my word, did he have very hugely varied experiences. And I think those of us who do chop and change career or country in which we live in, or part of the country, living in a city, what you've done, Ed, the difference between living and working in Oxford and living in Crediton and working in Chagford, that's a hugely cultural difference, and it's within one country, but that's quite big, isn't it? And so that affects our being and the way we see the world and the way people see us, and I think that's the thing that I wanted to get out, is that if we describe ourselves as a teacher or a scientist or a doctor or whatever, then the perceptions of others are based on their experience of teachers and scientists and doctors, which is only one tiny narrow part. There's a huge range of teachers, isn't there? So from people who are teaching in early years or in preschools, or which is early years as well, I know, or in primary or in private schools or in universities or in colleges, or their science teachers versus philosophy teachers versus English teachers versus art teachers. And then same is true with scientists. You can have someone who's a cutting edge, state of the art academic, or someone who's kind of grinding out test data in a sort of quality control lab in an industrial setting somewhere. there's just a huge, or you could, and then the nature, the variety of the science. You could be in the Amazon rainforest taking air samples and water samples, or you can be deep inside the human brain, or you can be looking at particle physics at CERN or wherever. So the word scientist is not enough. The word teacher is not enough. And I think our infusion of our character and our beliefs and our values with our profession is much more useful. But of course, our version of that inside our head is perhaps quite different to the version that's perceived by others. Anyway, we think we've done that quite well, haven't we?
So we were amazing. Let's see.
We were amazing. Thanks for all
were
your comments, guys. We are now 45 minutes in to the show. Yes. I think we will do the news, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about this ridiculous theory which flawed. I came up with the Blur Oasis prog trad thing that I did, because I think that's a bit frivolous, and then we can do some music to end off. I did say in the adverts for this show, so I'm sorry if anyone's dialed in, phoned in, whatever, podbeaned in, especially, that we're going to talk about creativity and creative thinking. I've always thought, actually, after last week when we sort of overran, that does warrant a whole program, and so it was based on my blog, based on the original Labour report by David Blunkett about a more creative curriculum and all the furore, which is now a few weeks old. But I think it'd be good to dive into the differences between creating something, which is an artistic thing or a making thing, versus the curiosity and creativity of young children, versus the extreme levels of creativity found in intense sort of high tech industry and mathematicians and scientists and inventors and so forth, and then people who are just creative thinkers, who just think, I hate this term, but outside the box, or there's no boundaries to their thinking, or are perhaps a bit more polymathic, so they can see things from different perspectives, rather than from their expert view just within. And so I think we're going to have to dedicate a whole show to that next week. Is that all right, Ed?
Yes.
Good. News. Here it is.
This episode of Teachers Talk Radio has been made possible with support from Witherslack Group, the UK's leading provider of SEN education and care. They're here to support you too through an ever-growing offer of free resources, including webinars, podcasts, articles, and events aimed at supporting teaching professionals like you. Visit their website at www.witherslackgroup.co.uk to find out more.
If you're listening to this, then we know we share one thing in common: a passion for the type of outstanding education that every child deserves. That's what makes us the leading provider of specialist education and care. We need people like you to help us achieve even more. With us, you'll be given all the resources and support you need, offered a clear path to career progression, and be rewarded with some of the best salaries and benefits the industry has to offer. We are Witherslack Group. If you'd like to find out more, we'd love to hear from you. Visit www.witherslackgroup.co.uk/careers and be part of our future.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The Christian Institute website reports that MPs have backed a push to ensure that state schools in England uphold the legal requirement to teach religious education, which in most cases reflects the centrality of Christianity. MP Martin Vickers led a Westminster debate on the issue and drew attention to the National Association of Teachers of RE on the Department for Education 2021 school workforce census. The census revealed that 1 in 5 schools did not teach RE at all in Year 11, despite being required to do so by law. An average of 10% of schools gave no time to RE in the years 7, 8 or 9. MP Nick Fletcher said that without an understanding of Christianity, it is not possible to understand the foundations of our institutions and laws or British culture. He went on to outline that other religions should be properly recognised in the preparation of RE syllabus. but that RE needs to recognise the particular place of Christianity in Great Britain. Mr Fletcher cited other demands placed on schools and failures by Ofsted to hold schools to account as the reason for letting RE slip. In response, Nick Gibb, a minister in the DfE, said all mainstream state-funded schools are required to teach RE. Schools that are not are acting unlawfully or are in breach of their funding agreement. He also added that collective worship was an important part of school life. Mr Gibb further reiterated the government's commitment to mandatory collective worship and RE, but also a parent's right to withdraw their children from the subject. Earlier this year, a judge ruled that exclusively Christian RE lessons in Northern Irish primary schools is unlawful, after a legal challenge was launched. The decision is being appealed as it dismissed the parent's right to withdraw their child from these lessons. In Lincoln, the Investigate Learning team at Lincoln Castle have been recognised for the outstanding learning programme they offer schools, colleges and universities. The Sandford Award recognises museums, galleries and historic buildings that offer the very best programmes aligned with the national curriculum. This year, the Castle has welcomed around 8,000 pupils and students, teaching them about the medieval monument's history. The Sandford Awards lead assessor described the insight the programme offers as unique and compelling. The programme covers a series of locally and nationally significant history, ranging from the medieval world and Magna Carta to the treatment of prisoners in Victorian England, bringing it vividly to life in a way that resonates with learners. In a recent news report on Teachers Talk Radio, we covered the Global World Skills Competition, which is taking place in various countries across the globe. This past week, the UK was hosting for the first time in over 10 years. Competitors have travelled from around the world to compete in aircraft maintenance and manufacturing in Cardiff and Wrexham. Finalists had the opportunity to visit various places of interest in the local areas, including countryside, museums and an old coal mine. These young competitors have been training for the last 3 years to win medals and showing off their skills. The UK entrants feature homegrown Welsh talent, with George Denman from Swansea telling FE Week how he hopes competing in world skills will be a huge boost to his career, because it teaches key skills like coping under pressure, working as a team and time management. Finally, new research reveals the impact of accent on social mobility. The latest report from Accent Bias in Britain project, led by Queen Mary University London's Professor Deviana Sharma, reveals that more than a quarter of senior professionals from working class backgrounds have been singled out in the workplace for their accent. The project examines the impact that someone's accent has on their journey through education and into the workplace. Professor Sharma says the research shows that accent-based discrimination actively disadvantages certain groups at key points. This creates a negative cycle reinforcing anxiety and marginalisation. The report recommends that action should be taken to diversify the workplace to ensure a range of accents is prevalent in organisations. Further details of the report can be found on the Queen Mary University of London website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hi, is that it? Oh, we've not got a tech this week. I was expecting a bit of Steve. We have only 6 minutes. Wow, Ed, you can come back. You can unmute. We're back in the room early. Hi, people.
What happened to the tech? Where was it?
I know, it's the only reason anyone listens.
No, I tell you what. Shall I go on about some minor bit? If you don't know how to do Control C, Control V, let me tell you now. Do you know how to press Control P? It's very useful.
Control P, Control Mrs. P.
Douglas is in the room. He's offering tech tips because normally, Douglas, after the news, there's normally a chap called Steve tells us something blindingly obvious about computers for about a couple of minutes, and he's not turned up today. Douglas, tell us something really useful about computers.
If you're planning on getting your school a suite of Chromebooks, then it's very important that you do not fucking do that.
Douglas,
Jesus.
no bad words.
No swearing. No swearing.
Chromebooks are the devil.
So that is my son's doing his tech tips.
Well, I'm going to pick up on Douglas's tech tip because we had a debate.
Lover.
Well, no. We had a debate about, so if we issue Chromebooks to our year 7s and 8s, so they each have one. It's kept at school; they don't take it home, but they each have one that they can use, in lessons as appropriate. But before we issued them, we had a debate about whether we should do laptops or Chromebooks. Chromebooks are obviously much cheaper, and do the kind of basics. But I said, if you want to be, it's. I think it's the trouble is it's. I don't know. It's just lowest common denominator, isn't it? I'm with Douglas, to be honest, because there's loads of stuff you can't do with a Chromebook that you can do with a laptop.
Many years ago, when Chromebooks were barely a twinkle in most of our eyes, I went to visit a local school who had specialised. They had a teacher who was very passionate, and you could tell he was very passionate because he had a Windows Chrome badge on his tie. Which I think
oh my gosh!
Branding yourself, then there's an issue, isn't there? But that you become the product. And he's like, "Oh, it's brilliant. We do this. So I said, "Oh, tell me about it." He says, "Yes, well, there's me. I'm full time, and then we got a couple of other guys who work in the office. They're running the Chrome system." I'm like, "Blimey, that's kind of." There's another guy who does half a day, but this is this is how it works. And then I did a tour of the school, and he showed me they got trolleys with Chromebooks in every classroom, and kids could just pick them up and log in. It didn't matter which one they picked up, And we went past a room with lots of computers in it. I said, "Oh, look, you still got a thing." He goes, "Oh, yeah, no, you still need a computer room because you can't run." And then he told me all the things you couldn't run. So he says, "Oh, yeah, well, we can't run all the stuff for the design technology stuff because that needs to be on a desktop, and it's a bit awkward running Windows, so we keep machines for that, and we do this, we do that, and we do the other." This was in a medium-sized secondary. I'm just like, okay, what it sounds like is you're using the Chromes to take notes in class. Whereas if you want to do anything else that's got proprietary software that isn't a web-based app, at that point you start needing the other thing. And the schools which have dived into it, and it's an awful lot of them, now can't do a lot of things we used to do in a computer room. And the computing curriculum has, as a result, been narrowed sharply, I believe. But there you go.
Yes, there we go. Yeah, cheaper though,
absolutely.
Cheaper.
The day
but it's a false.
It's monetized properly. We will be up against the wall, won't we?
Yeah, it's cheaper, and it makes it look like you're doing something sort of modern and techie to the parents in an independent school. But the deeper purpose. Big questions. Anyway, I've said too much on that already, I think. So we need to go to your music, Ed. But before we go to your music,
what am I playing? Quick.
You're going to play whatever you want to play. Maybe something.
I was going to do a bit of Oasis because we were.
You're going to wind me up. Don't play Oasis yet though, because I need to talk about this first.
Okay. So, well, are you going to talk about it now, or am I going to quickly choose a different tune?
What? Oh, no. You can talk about Oasis.
Right.
You can choose an Oasis tune, but I'm going to talk about this ridiculous. I came up with this, so I keep having these debates about everything and anything with the wonderful big shout out to Alison Honeybone. I don't know if she ever listens to the show. I don't think she listens live, but she may listen back. Anyway, Alison and I we sort of agree on quite a lot, but we also have quite different. We come from different places, and one of the things, there's been a lot about pulp on the twits recently, because pulp. Pretty much everybody loves pulp. I love pulp, and I've seen them, and I saw them back in the early days. Well, not their really early days, because they were together for years before they became popular and famous. Several years.
My friend Tina, who I used to work with back in the 90s, used to go to parties at Jarvis's flat when she was at university.
Yeah, nice.
She was my boss in the mid-90s, so there you go.
Yeah, and Jarvis. So I think Pulp formed about 1983 or 1984, but they they played on the NME stage in the afternoon, on the Sunday afternoon in my first Glastonbury 1994, and they weren't very well known then. That was the His and Hers album. Do you remember the first time? I can't remember a worse time. And Babies was on that album, and She's a Lady, and all that, and lyrically fascinating. What charisma Jarvis has. Good tunes as well. You see, I think Pulp are great, but I don't think they've not got the body of work that Blur have, in my opinion. They've got two really fantastic albums, and they're perhaps a bit cooler because Damon Albarn's quite a kind of what's the word? He winds people up, He's quite but I think a lot of people on the Twitter have been going on about Pulp and this because they're playing some reunion concerts in the summer and very excited about their tickets. And then somehow I got into a conversation about this, and then the old Blur and Oasis thing came up, and it's also boring. And I developed this theory, which is completely flawed. I knew it was flawed at the time, but it's quite fun, that if you're a Blur fan, more of a Blur fan than an Oasis fan, there's a correlation with being a little bit more prog-leaning in terms of teaching. And if you're an Oasis fan, it's a bit stodgy, it's a bit trad, it's a bit safe, it's a bit one-dimensional. It's a bit, if you're an Oasis fan, you're more of a traditionalist sort of teacher. And so I put this survey out, and I was wrong, people. Well, the first thing I found out is that of the 127 people on my timeline who answered the survey, 55% prefer Blur to the 45% who like Oasis better. So that was a good result. I liked that result because that's not in line with the sort of popularity sing along in the pub kind of thing. So I was pleased with that winning, but also there are more trad-leaning people in the survey. So 32% for Blur and 26% for Oasis. So what's that? The 32, 38, 58% trad-leaning, and 23 plus 19 is indeed 42% prog-leaning. But both Blur and Oasis had more trad-leaning fans than prog-leaning fans, and the difference between them, so Blur trad-leaning 32%, Blur prog-leaning 23%, Oasis trad-leaning 26%, and Oasis prog-leaning 19%. So my theory's blown out of the water, although it wasn't a very well conducted, it wasn't a randomly controlled trial, or whatever you call them, and I'm
honest, I thought it was doomed to failure from the very first moment.
I thought it was doomed to failure as well, but I enjoyed having a bit of fun with it.
Right on that one, then. You're going to be right.
Sorry?
So it must have been nice to be right on that one, on the it's doomed to failure. I don't know. Yes. I actually got what you were getting at, and I thought, I can kind of see that idea. I think I know how wrong I was to assume that trads were more likely to vote Conservative. That turned out to be as wrong as a wrong thing, didn't it? So it doesn't surprise me, that one. Whereas Lucy's put
in the chat blur, 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 and Mrs. P in both debates. It just depends how I feel on any given day. Yes,
Do you remember Leon Herring's Fist of Fun?
Yeah,
was on the
yes, I do.
Around the same time. I think it was Fist of Fun, whichever. I think it was that outing. They had a character who was the slightly strange vicar. Actually, he might have been on This Morning with Richard, Not Judy, thinking about it. But he used to come on and do a strange little homily, played by, name's gone out of my head. It will come to me in the middle of the night. But yes, he did one. Well, a young man came up to me and he said, "Who do you prefer, the Blur band or the Oasis band?" And I said, "Oh, my dear boy, I prefer Jesus." And he said, "No, that's not what I asked you. I asked you, do you prefer Blur or Oasis?" So I said, I prefer Blur. And then he went away and I said, "But really, I prefer Jesus." And it was funny at the time, but I think that's how it is with a lot of people with Pulp. They have to have an answer to the Oasis Blur dichotomy, but really they what they truly love is Common People, isn't it? That's what they really love.
Yeah, Common People is such a fantastic song. Common People is trumps all other songs of its era because it's just it's very, very clever and a little bit bitter.
Up against it? That's a really good question for another time, or a thread on Twitter or Mastodon or something. Yeah, what song could you from that era could you possibly put up against Common People? I can't think of one right now.
No,
Govinda Jaya, possibly. That was great.
Govinda Kula Shaker. That was right up there. No, I don't think. No, I don't think there's. I don't think for me there's not a one standout Blur track because it's a body of work, and it's a body of work that is quite diverse. I like that. I like their punky energy and their songcraft and their lyrics. Whereas Oasis, I appreciate their first album because it was fresh, but I just don't think there's as much. It doesn't intrigue me musically. It's
to me, but I'm not who they're aimed at. That's fine.
Yeah,
anyway.
But there's no right answer on any of this stuff. There's no right answer on any of this stuff because it is the subjectivity of taste.
Wrong answers, and one of them's Oasis. It is 10:05. I've got to go to bed soon. So let's do a verse and a chorus, and then we might wind it up. And you've got to sing along. Today is gonna be the day that they're gonna throw it back to you. By now you should have somehow realized what you gotta do. I don't believe that anybody feels the way I do about you now.
Backbeat, the word is on the street that the fire in your heart is out.
I'm sure that you heard it all before, but you never really had a doubt. I don't believe that anybody feels the way I
do about you now.
You ready for the chorus? Because it's a big one. And all the roads we have to walk are winding, and all the lights that lead us there are blinding. There are many things that I would like to say to you, but I don't know how. Because maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me. And after all, you're my wonderwall.
Named after a George Harrison film, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think George maybe smiled and nodded and said, "That's really sweet, guys," but I don't know that it's anyway.
I think I like the beginning.
Never throw it back to you.
This is good. The verse is good.
It is a good song if you don't read the lyrics. If you just listen.
I think the song is good. The verse is good. I don't think the chorus is that great because it's so wanky. I think the chorus is sorry. For the Oasis fans. But it's just.
Okay, Oasis fans absolutely kicking off in the comments.
Are they?
I don't know.
No, no, we don't have Oasis fans listening to our show.
No, I don't think we do. No,
they might listen back. They'll never listen back again.
Yeah.
Do you want to do one more verse, or do you want to say good night?
No, I'm going to say good night. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Good night.
Good night.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.